all that is noble is in itself of a quiet nature, and appears to sleep until it is aroused and summoned forth by contrast. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
So where do the old and new money live within Europe? In our previous geography of wealth, I talked about where old and new money vacation in Europe. Thanks to the insights I gained from talking to you on my Analyzing Finance with Nick tour in Europe this summer, I was able to get a better idea not just of where people travel when they go to Europe, but where the local European elites reside. Europe is a large, historically significant region of the world with a lot of historically and globally important cities. This will obviously have to be divided into multiple parts. And so I am going to do several videos about the old and new money in Europe as I continue to gain more insight. But for this one, we're going to start in 5 core cities that I too have the most knowledge on. But really just for context of European industrial development will be very important here. The wealth and the GDP in Europe is relatively concentrated, not just on a social class sense where old money has a bulk of the wealth and they use the combination of high taxes and generous welfare state to help disincentivize new emerging money from competing with them. Even with the way industry developed in Europe, it was really concentrated in a particular region in Western Europe. And that is known as the blue banana, which I will attach an image here. The blue banana is this curve that stretches from London through the Low Countries, through the Ruhr region in Germany, down through Bavaria and Baden in southern part of Germany, through Switzerland and northern Italy. Outside of a few French enclaves, this is where the bulk of the industry in Europe developed. As a result, a lot of the money in Europe, particularly made in the early Industrial Revolution, is concentrated within this blue banana area. This concentration is the legacy of communism. Most of Europe was east of the historical Iron Curtain, does not really have old money because all the old money that was there was seized or killed by the Soviet Union or by communist revolutionaries. The legacy of communism essentially eroded almost all of the old money in Eastern Europe. Market capitalism is relatively new in this part of the world, really since the late 1980s and early 1990s. There has been some new money that has emerged, but it hasn't emerged really to the degree that there's a lot of new money enclaves yet in this part of the world, but that is starting to change with the rapid development of certain countries in this region. It doesn't really help the matter that the rich of these countries like to have secondary or even primary residences in Western Europe or the United States once they've achieved a certain level of wealth. But with all that intro context, let's go to our first city that we are going to discuss, and that really is Greater Amsterdam, or really just the Netherlands effectively. Within the city of Amsterdam, there are 3 major points. The first one is the Canal District.
This is the Canal District. This is where the old money in Amsterdam lives. As we explore this geography of wealth in Europe, I'm going to try to highlight some of the cities that I managed to stop by. This is where the original great Dutch traders created their estates and where a lot of the wealth acquired from the combination of early capitalism and colonialism set foot here.
The second really old money enclave outside of the Canal District is Amsterdam Zuid, and Amsterdam Zuid, which is kind of southern part of like the core main city. It's also where the secondary train station is in Amsterdam, and it is known for being a old money high income place. And then the main new money place is the neighborhood right to the south of Amsterdam Zuid is known as Zuidas. Zuidas has become an emerging place for new money, particularly in the financial services industry. Amsterdam has been a place of a lot of financial wealth that's been generated and global trade. It has a lot more new money than really other parts of Europe. Since it is a relatively small and densely populated place. Suburbanization is more developed within this part of Europe. Let's start with the West. There is a town, Bloemendaal, which is an old money suburb in Amsterdam. If we go to the east, there is one old money suburb, which is Laren, but the east is more new money suburbs. We have Bussum, Blaricum, and then to the north, we have Tigui, known for being like suburban places where people move with money once they have families and no longer want to live in the city. Pardon my bad Dutch pronunciations. It's a rather difficult language, but I am doing my best here. And then outside of Amsterdam, there is another old money enclave between Amsterdam and The Hague, the town called Wassenaar. Wassenaar is a place where a lot of people like to go more for summer getaways, and if they have business to do in The Hague or are involved in political society, which requires time to be spent in The Hague. And so that really is the Netherlands. And next, what we're going to talk about is Munich, which is known for being the most old money place in Germany. Bavaria and Munich are some of the wealthiest parts of Germany. Berlin is the capital, but Berlin was split 50-50 between East Germany and West Germany. And so it's isolation from the rest of West Germany in the Cold War, and the remaining part surrounding it being part of a communist state means that Berlin didn't develop the same kind of wealth that other national capitals would have, and Munich became the substitute place for German wealth. This place, Bavaria, is one of the least damaged places from the world wars compared to other parts of Germany. It's also close to other wealth enclaves in Switzerland. Let's start with the old money in Munich. When it comes to old money in Munich, they're really in the city. There's two main areas. The first one is an area called Herzogpark in the north. The second is the center, the Altstadt area, which includes Prinzengentenstrasse is kind of the street that kind of borders it to the north, and the neighborhood of Liho and Maria Theresa Strasse and the neighborhood around there are kind of really known as like the old money area of the city center of Munich. And then really for the new money, it is on the other side surrounding. But the thing is really just the key point when it comes to cities, and Amsterdam is somewhat the exception to this, but still kind of holds to this rule, is that wealth in European cities kind of has a donut structure, for lack of a better term. The downtown, the old town, and the inner cities, contrary to the United States, tend to be the wealthier parts of European cities. The very wealthy often have estates in the far exurbs or the more remote suburbs where they can have a bigger house with more space and a yard. Usually, if you live in these more downtown areas, even if you have a lot of square footage, it's going to be like a townhome or an apartment, high density in European cities. And the fact that most of these were built before the automobile became mainstream, unlike the United States. So the development patterns as a result have been quite different. Because inner cities in Europe historically were wealthier and safer, you had wealthy being more willing to live in these parts. As for America, the inner cities often are higher crime and more lower income populations and industrial hubs. And so it creates a different pattern in where American wealthy tends to live in inner suburbs or the closest places to the cities that aren't in the city limits. Whereas in Europe, the inner suburbs tend to be the poorest parts. It's where workers who need to commute into the city live, but it is not as nice, and it's still fairly dense, the inner suburbs in Europe. It's not really the same as like America, where the inner suburbs you can have like detached single family homes and just a lot more living space, for a lack of a better term. They're still pretty dense with mostly townhomes and apartments and duplexes and things, even in the inner ring suburbs. This is starting to change in America, particularly in greater Los Angeles, the suburbs of New York and San Francisco. that are adopting more European levels of density for inner suburbs. But Europe, this has been a structural thing for a much longer period of time. And these inner suburbs, because they are not the nicest parts of Europe, you don't really see wealthy living in inner suburbs like they do in America. And you can also notice with the voting patterns, you see in urban cores in a lot of European cities votes for center-right and right-leaning parties, where this is very unlikely to see in America. And it's not because the inner city people just happen to be bigger fans of capitalism. It's a different demographic living in these cities and these parts of the cities particularly. And so that's why really we go back to Munich here. A lot of the new money is within the core of the center city in Old Town, but just on the other parts that haven't really been occupied by the old money. So there's kind of three main areas. These are known as new money neighborhoods that have developed over the last 30 years or so. And that really is when it comes to the core of Munich, but there are some old money suburbs. What makes Munich different is it doesn't have the north-south divide. In fact, the old money suburbs are actually more in the south, and the two that really stood out to me are Pullach and Grunwald. They're also closer to the old money vacation destination in Bavaria, to Guernsey, which I discussed in that video. Next, before we talk about Italy, we're going to talk about one place east of the Iron Curtain, and that is Warsaw, Poland. Poland has an economy that is rapidly developed in the last few decades. In fact, at the pace things are going, Poland's going to have a higher GDP per capita than the UK by 2030. And as a result of this, you're starting to see wealth develop. Since communism took out all the old money, it's really the new money that's left. There's one neighborhood that they all are starting to concentrate where you could see like wealthy Beverly Hills style, but maybe with old European architecture a little bit mixed into it, style mansions in Poland. And that is a neighborhood called Konstantin Jezoromia. And Konstantin Jezoromia is where the glitz, glamour, and big luxury estates are within Warsaw. Eastern Europe and the pre-Iron Curtain area is just starting to develop its own local enclaves of wealth, so that's why I have such limited coverage on it. And the last two cities we are going to talk about are in Italy, Milan and Rome. We're going to start with Milan, which is very representative of the donut theory when it comes to cities. All of the wealthy areas happen to be in the inner city core of Milan, and then you have a lot of wealthy Italians have estates in the countryside, in the far out exurban areas or beyond, whereas the inner ring of suburbs is the most dangerous parts of the city. And I know this from experience. I was trying to look for the closest bowling alley to where I was going to university and happened to be out in some of these outer ring suburbs. When I go to the bowling alley at 4 p.m, it was shut down, and I saw a lot of flags responsible for a lot of crime in Italy, and just a general eerie quietness to that neighborhood. I was in the inner suburbs, and those are generally where you don't want to go when you're in Milan. And with that donut effect, you have a lot of the money concentrating in the inner city. And Milan, this has been shown in a most recent Wall Street Journal, has become a big hub for wealth in Italy. And Italy has starting to attract new money, but not really for the reasons you think. It's not like Italy has a dynamic tech industry or is becoming a vanguard of entrepreneurship and other new industries. In fact, really, the new money, quote unquote, from Milan is becoming from other parts of Europe, or really other parts of the world, due to recent changes in Italy's tax laws. I didn't cover this in my economic future of Italy video because I didn't think that this non-dom law is really big enough to change the greater trajectory of Italy's economic struggles. But for the case of where wealth lives in Italy, it does have a serious impact. So that's why I'm going to really kind of explain it here to provide some context. Italy now allows high net worth individuals who become new tax residents, which basically they've not been a tax resident of Italy for 9 of the prior 10 years, to opt into a substitute flat tax of 200,000 euro per year on all foreign source income, regardless of the amount. So you need to be a fairly wealthy person for this to benefit you. It's depending also what country you live in as well. But if you're paying that much in taxes, it means you're probably making at least 500,000 USD per year or more, where a flat tax would make sense versus paying taxes in your home country. And to leave your home country and to move for tax savings, I think that even that threshold is a little bit lower. It's probably closer to about 1 million USD, or maybe 800,000 euro will be the mark where I think people would start to take non-dom relocation seriously. And a lot of people with London's tax laws and the UK's tax laws going more against the non-dom tax breaks, those same people who used to live in London for those reasons are flocking now to Milan because it is the financial center of Italy. It's kind of one of the more trendy cities and one of the more developed places and one of the better school systems really relatively in the country. It's where economic activity is a little bit stronger because it is the southern end of the blue banana that we talked about earlier. Domestic Italian sourced income remains taxed under ordinary income, and this flat tax election for non-doms lasts up to 15 years and cannot be renewed beyond that. And it also are exemptions for inheritance tax on foreign assets. So that's the rule on that. And that law is attracting wealthy from other very high tax places, particularly the UK and the rest of the EU, to relocate to Italy for this very reason. Americans don't benefit this because Americans have to pay tax on their worldwide income no matter where they live. So you're not seeing Americans moving to Milan for tax reasons. But nonetheless, this is attracting an inflow of new wealth, and these people need a new place to live, and so the demand for high-end real estate has really spiked in Milan the last few years, and there's a few areas these people are concentrating in. But before we get into the new money, let's start with the old money in Milan. The first place for old money in Milan is the downtown historical district and center core, which includes a lot of monuments such as the Duomo Cathedral, the Quadrilateral Shopping Center, which is very famous for having a lot of flagship high-end designer stores, and then the Brera, which is like kind of a mix of old money, prestige with an artistic side to it. And kind of the combination of all these areas is like the core Historico Centrale old money neighborhood. The other really area that has a lot of old money in the center is the neighborhood known as Magenta, which is bisected by the Corso Magenta Street. And this is really close to the city center, but not quite in it. And I think it's also a big old money hub. I remember from my experiences when I did live in Milan, you saw all the highest end stores, sophisticated cultural things such as museums and opera houses, higher end experiences and restaurants, old estates tended to be concentrated in this area. The new money is to the north, and Milan, like many other cities I've discussed, does have a clear north-south divide where the wealth tends to be the city center and north, whereas the poor areas tend to be in the inner suburbs and in the south. And we're going to start now. There's really three places that really kind of fit the new money of Milan. The oldest and most established new money area in Milan is a neighborhood known as Porta Nuovo. But now with all the inflows of non-doms, you're having a lot more developments starting. One, for example, is an area called City Life to the northwest, which used to be kind of more of a working class area that has now rapidly gentrified and is becoming a hub of new money in Milan. And then the other area is the Bosco Verticale, or in English is the vertical forest, where it's these massive luxury high-rise buildings that are very green because they were growing a lot of trees and other plants on the walls and roofs of these buildings. So it kind of looks like a vertical forest and has become a hip, new, trendy building and surrounding area to live within Milan. And then the last city we're going to talk about on this version of the geography of wealth of Europe is the capital of Italy, Rome. Rome is mostly a government and tourism driven town. As a result, Rome doesn't have a lot of business wealth or a lot of really old and new money, especially with the development patterns of Italy. Most of the wealth in Italy was developed in the more industrial north, whether it's Torino, Milano, Bologna, and even in Tuscany. So, whereas Rome was kind of part of the Papal States for most of the early modern period and didn't really get incorporated into what is modern Italy till the 1860s, and it really is more of a political, religious, tourism, and cultural center. So, in theory, Rome has a really clear north-south divide. So basically, like Vatican City and north is known as the wealthier part of Rome, and south of there is known as the lower income part of Rome. There are really only two real neighborhoods that are truly wealthy and upscale enough that I would classify as money neighborhoods, and they're both towards the far north of the city on the Tiber River. The old money, which there's a lot of new money in this place too, because it is a go-to exclusive rich neighborhood in Rome, is Parioli. It's mostly old established money in Rome, especially those who aren't involved directly with politics, but it also is attracting a newer money crowd. And as Parioli has filled up, there has been a newer money area that has developed just a little bit to the west on the Tiber, and that is the Flaminio Quarter. The Flaminio Quarter is kind of the emerging newer money place in Rome. It's close to the Parioli. It's close to the old Olympic Village from when Rome had the Olympics in 1960. But it's still a newer area that has rapidly become more upscale in the last few decades. Overall, that's going to wrap up part one of the geography of wealth for Europe. And we're going to be doing our second part. We're going to cover Switzerland because there's so much wealth in Switzerland. I think it deserves a video of its own for this series. But outside of Switzerland, what other cities would you like me to cover in Europe? I've already done London on an older video, so the focus is going to be mainly on the continent of Europe. If your city was not mentioned, please comment in where are the old and new money regions of your city in Europe or anywhere else in the world that you're watching this from. And if you do live or are familiar with the cities I mentioned, are there any neighborhoods or suburbs that I missed in either Warsaw, Rome, Munich, Milan, or Amsterdam? Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and I always appreciate the quality of the discourse in our comments. Thank you guys all for watching.